Now, other interesting culture news, you have Bud Light's founder's grandson slamming Anheuser Busch InBev and their interesting business blunder of partnering with Dylan Mulvaney. Now, this was a recent TMZ interview with the grandson of the founder, who is Billy Busch, and he was saying that his late father, August Gussie Busch Jr., and his father's dad, who created Anheuser Busch InBev, and Adolphus Busch, they would be, quote, would have rolled over in their graves, unquote, if they were alive to see the financial and social repercussions wrought with the failed partnership. Now, in terms of winding back the clock in the company history and the family history, the St. Louis-based Busch family sold their stake in the firm in 2008 after having it in the family for more than 150 years. And it looks like they sold their current stake in InBev for $52 billion. Now, ever since Anheuser-Busch all became one, they actually saw their valuation swell up to $140 billion. Now, granted, much of that was erased, or not much, a fair amount of that was erased once April 1st came along, and they lost, I believe, it was $28 billion in stock value ever since they partnered with Dylan Mulvaney April 1st, which I don't know if it's hindsight's 20. There is something oddly hilarious about it being April 1st, and it was not intended to be a joke, but they pissed off people on the left, on the right, and even in the middle, and they have not recovered since. In fact, they went from being the number one beer in the United States for 20 years to now 14. Modelo beat them in the United States for 2 months in a row, and I suspect it'll be 3 months in a row as well. And Modelo, again, in the United States, it's a separate company. It's owned by Constellation Brands, which I believe is headquartered in New York. Now, globally, yes, Anheuser Busch InBev does own Modelo. So if you're buying Modelo in Spain or Portugal or overseas, you are supporting Anheuser Busch InBev. In the United States, if you believe in the boycott, you would be safe in your boycott efforts if you were to purchase Modelo. It was actually one of the conditions that the United States Security Exchange Commissions, or the SEC, set in place for the merger of Anheuser-Busch with InBev to begin with. So now it's actually a global conglomerate with InBev being headquartered out of Belgium. They don't just make waffles and awesome rifles, apparently. Now, in terms of the family history, I think it's worth going into because it's one of those things where some people are blaming the family, thinking they had more control of the company. Why did they sell out? Well, as in many instances, it sometimes isn't their saying because they didn't have a majority stake in the company anymore. So, in terms of diving more into the interview, and Bush actually was speaking with TMZ's head, Harvey Levin, and talking about how they lost $390 million in sales. Now, they got to talk about the controversial part of the company with partnering with Dylan Mulvaney, and in that, Bush said, quote, when talking about his family's heritage and what their beliefs are in terms of religious, political, social, in this case, gender, phenomenons. And he said, they believe that transgenderism, gays, that sort of thing is all a very personal issue, unquote. Speaking for pioneering figures like his dad, August, who served as a chairman from 1946 to 1975, and Adolphus, the Missouri magnate who cooked up the first batch of Budweiser in 1876. Now, it looks like both, his dad and grandfather, unfortunately, had passed, and both his natural causes. And unfortunately, it looks like his grandfather actually ended up ending his life in 1934 after Prohibition brought his creation to the brink of bankruptcy. Now, it looks like this. I love business history. Let me know in the comments if you don't want as much background when you talk about companies. We can go into, here's a little highlight of where the company came from. Personally, I find it fascinating, but let me know in the comments if you want more or less of that content. Now, in terms of the history, his son August Sr. managed to save the company during Prohibition by selling soda and ice cream, which is fascinating from a business perspective to actually pivot and stay open in what was one of the most inopportune kinds to be a business. That's pretty impressive in and of itself. And he actually ended up building up Anheuser-Busch companies into the largest brewery in the world by 1957, which in terms of growth rate, that's astronomical. That is almost as good as the growth rate as our subscriptions. Do me a favor and click that subscribe button and help us out. Now, it looks like the family would pass the company through generations, and Billy and his several siblings and cousins would become partial owners. During this span, however, the family sold an estimated 25% stake from their ownership over the course from 1989 to 2008, which ended in a historic sale after their stake depleted to less than 5% of shares at the time, which is quite unfortunate because, again, it's still a lot of money, but fiscally, in terms of the breakdown of the shares of the company, once you don't have control of the company, you're at the behest of the shareholders. One of the reasons that the Ford company is still under the Ford family is because they might not have a majority of the Class A stock, which is the publicly traded stock, but the untraded stock, they have a majority of that stock. So in terms of the voting stock, they have a majority say of what the company still does to this day, even though the public can buy the stock. You and I can buy Ford if we were to want to have a share in the company. Now, it looks like because they were only at 5%, they were unable to block the transaction, which at the time between Anheuser Busch and InBev combining was $48 billion. Now, granted, that being said, the family, including Billy and the then CEO half-nephew of August the 5th, continued to fight back, and they actually rejected InBev's initial proposal after later striking a deal for $70 per share, giving them an extra $4 billion in the sale. Now, it looks like an astonishing growth rate for the family as well. It looks like the family has an estimated 30 heirs, with Billy and his final Bush boss, August the 4th, 59 included, or age 59. And of course, unfortunately, after the sale, they had to lay off some employees, and of course, the culture changed as well. And in terms of, continuing the conversation, asking, did your family ever think of advertising campaigns, and what did they think about this? They had Billy say, quote, "They love this country because it's a free country and people are allowed to do what they want, but it was never meant to be on a beer can and pushed in people's faces." So it sounds like they're very much more socially conservative, do what you want, but you don't advertise it per se. So it is unfortunate to see what was a family business for generations eventually got diluted with the stock. And now, of course, I don't even believe he's on the board of directors. They really don't have much to do with the company anymore. And what was an icon, for decades is now, granted, they're still around. They've only quote unquote, lost $390 million in sales. Really interesting to see, how many of these up-and-coming beer companies can rival them in the future. There's only a couple left, and very few are family-owned. I know in terms of my anecdotal knowledge of the alcohol industry, Yaling is probably the most well-known beer company. It's the oldest beer company in the United States, but also one of the few that's still family-owned, that's on, I'll say, almost more of a mass scale. I'd be interested to see, could even they rival Anheuser Busch InBev? The odds are pretty low, but some people, they like an underdog, and I would say perhaps, maybe. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to tune in today. Also, trying to get to 3,000 subscribers by the end of August, so I greatly appreciate you taking the time to click that subscribe button. Also, taking the time to like and comment, also greatly appreciate. It really helps the channel grow and develop as we try to make the content and production better and better. Also, don't forget to tell your family, tell your coworkers, heck, tell your friends, heck, even tell your enemies, tell anyone and everyone. Just stay safe and fight the good fight.